So Dr. DeCubellis here, and today I wanted to talk with attorney John Risvold. He's a personal injury attorney, and one thing I've noticed is that this is an area that a lot of people don't understand a lot, and they have questions. So I wanted to bring an expert on to really go over these questions. So how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you very much for having me. Like you said, I'm a personal injury attorney. I help people that are hurt deal with medical bills, their insurance, their lost wages, getting their car fixed, everything they need really under one umbrella so that they can get their lives back in order. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it and maybe help some people learn why they need a lawyer like me if they're hurt.
Great. Yeah, and that's very important. And there's kind of two ways I want to talk about this is A, from the patient perspective, but also kind of from your perspective of what you look at with not only a case, but how you value it, but also how you value the relationships of the other people you work with when it comes to a case. But let's start with a patient. So when a patient is looking, and let's say they get into an accident and they're looking at an attorney, what are some of the things you would tell them about how hiring a personal injury attorney is different than hiring like a tax attorney?
Sure. The biggest difference is that I am not the kind of lawyer who gets paid per hour. I'm the kind of lawyer who gets paid perhaps. And what I mean by that is you're not going to pay me a retainer fee. You're not going to pay me by the hour. I'm never going to ask you for money. I only ever get paid if I recover money for you. If I win, we both get paid. If I lose, nothing happens. You don't owe me any money. There's no bill to you. There's truly no risk to you. So I'm what's called a contingent fee lawyer. I only get paid if I win. So that's the biggest advantage, I think, for any injured person when they're looking for a lawyer is hiring a personal injury lawyer means you're hiring a contingent fee lawyer. So you're hiring somebody to basically be a professional negotiator and do battle against insurance companies for you, but you're not paying for it. The insurance company who is on the other side, the at-fault driver's insurance, for instance, if you're in a car crash, that insurance company is ultimately the one that pays me because I take a percentage of the total recovery.
Well, I think that's important too, because what people have to understand is when they're in an accident, the insurance company of the at-fault driver is not working for them and is not looking for their best interest in any way, shape, or form. They're all about trying to either protect their client or even higher up, just save themselves some money. So it's very important to speak with an attorney very quickly before you start talking about any kind of paperwork or making statements, because again, the attorney's working for you. They have your best interest because like he said, they're not going to get any money unless they recover money from you. The insurance company is going to try to do everything in their power to minimize their damages.
Absolutely. Anybody that has to spend over $1 billion a year in advertising to convince you that they're your friend or they're on your side is definitely not your friend. And they're definitely not on your side. I think the most important phone calls you should make after a car crash are 911, a call to your personal doctor, and then a call to a personal injury attorney. The last person you ever need to speak to is an insurance adjuster because they are just trying to collect evidence, like you said, to build a case against you. And your lawyer is going to build a case for you. And if you think just for a second about how many hundreds and hundreds of lawyers the insurance company employs, don't you think you should probably have one?
Very good point. Very good point. Now, the other thing too is, which I think people need to kind of understand is, unfortunately, when it comes to a personal injury case, it's not necessarily something that's going to be settled in a week. It takes a little bit of time. So there is some patience involved. But that's why also talking with an attorney is very important because they're going to handle all those things throughout the course. And you're not going to have to worry about that. You know exactly what the timelines are and when things need to be filed. And that's what you do for the client.
Absolutely. When I have a new client, I tell them your only responsibility now that you've hired me is to get better and feel better and try to get your health back. And that's why it's so vitally important they work with a great doctor like you, but that's their responsibility now. Everything else shifts to me. So all the phone calls, all the negotiating, all the dealing with billing and things like that, that can all be handled by your lawyer. You can use any number of methods to pay for your bills, but you need to understand the at-fault insurance is not going to pay your bills piecemeal, right? So you want to be working with a lawyer who either can work with your doctors to arrange for payments on your bills or arrange some way that your bills can be paid out of the settlement on the back end, or who can work with your health insurance or things like that. So you don't have to think about or do or mess with any of these things. You just need to make sure you show up for your doctor's appointments, you do what your doctors are telling you to do, and you get better. And I think that's really the best advantage you could have in a situation where your life's turned upside down like this is you don't have any of that stress anymore. You just have to get better.
Right. And that kind of brings us to our next point. So when you talk with a personal injury attorney and you hire that attorney, they're going to take so much off your plate and they're going to make it much easier for you. But also when we talk about from a doctor perspective, when doctors when you're working with doctors or a doctor is working with a personal injury case, let's talk about some of the things that you have to deal with, some of the bad stuff that you see. So let's start off from the first thing. Let's say the first thing a doctor can do to kind of make you raise a red flag or say, I'm not sure he kind of knows what it's doing. The first thing they can do, let's say a patient's already been treating for a couple of days. What's the first thing that should have happened that you see some doctors not do?
So the first thing that I see that is an immediate red flag is when any doctor reaches out to the at-fault insurance and tries to get that at-fault insurance to start to pay bills. That is an immediate red flag because all that's going to do is throw a wrench in the ultimate settlement process. What they should be doing is asking the patient if they have a lawyer, who that lawyer is, and then contacting me. Because what I can do is set you up on a lien under the Illinois Lien Act to protect your bill and try to get almost the full amount in some cases of that bill paid with no insurance reductions or anything like that, get that amount paid out of a settlement. So your patient doesn't have to worry about the bill and they're not worried about putting it on a credit card or something like that, which I think is huge because medical debt is the number one cause of bankruptcy in America. So they don't have to worry about that debt now. And then number two is you don't have to worry about how are you going to get paid as a doctor because you're working with the lawyer. If you're reaching out to the at-fault insurance the same way we tell a client or a patient not to, you're going to be in the same boat. They're not interested in paying your bill. And if they are interested in paying it, they're interested in paying the smallest amount possible. So maybe they'll send you a $1,000 or a $5,000 medical payments coverage check. And once that money's gone, it's gone. Versus if there's a patient that needs $10, $20, $30,000 worth of treatment and you're the one rendering that treatment, you're never going to get paid on those bills. Or if you are, you're going to get paid a tiny, tiny amount. So I think working with the attorney right off the bat is one of the most important things you can do and avoiding the at-fault insurance. It's quick, easy money, but it runs out fast. So if you look long-term, your better bet as a business person and as a doctor, and also the best thing you can do to help your patient is to work with their lawyer. Yeah.
And I would agree with that. I mean, I just working in multiple states with multiple personal injury insurance and just billing the insurance it's never worked to where you are going to not only get your money paid, but also where you're going to be able to actually handle that case properly. So the only time we would ever do it is if we're in Florida because Florida has, it's a no-fault state. So they've got a multiple dollar amount of PIP that's lined up. So that's okay to do it in that case. But normal states, it doesn't make any sense. Now let's talk about this too, because when we talk about personal injury clients and their injuries, we can kind of deal with, if in a sense, we kind of have two separate categories. So we have your hard tissue cases, which is going to be where we have fractures, broken bones. They might need surgery. It's clearly apparent as to what the injury was because it's something that's going to require hospital stays and potentially surgeries. On the other hand, we also have some soft tissue cases to where it's not readily apparent. They might have some pain, but it's not something that they're going to see as a fracture or something like that. So one thing is, so let's say you get a soft tissue client that comes in, and the first thing you see is the doctor has diagnosed them with a sprain. What's the first thing that goes through your mind if you see, okay, I have a sprain case now?
I got to get to work hard. Right? Sprain in the common parlance is something you get when you twist your ankle because you missed a step, right? Or you tripped over one of your kids' toys and you sprain your ankle. A sprain is something we see if you're a football fan, you see somebody has a sprained knee and they miss maybe one game, right? Versus you see catastrophic injuries in a sport like that. I don't like that word just because it has a medical, connotation that means something, and that is important, but in an insurance world and to regular people, it means not that bad. So when I see that word in a chart right away, I'm already thinking about how I can talk to my client and their doctor and see what we can do to make sure that they're getting proper treatment. Not only because I don't like the word and I think it undersells the true injury, but also because some doctors who may not know what they're doing in the personal injury world, or maybe new to the personal injury world, may stop short of the full range of treatment that this person needs to get better because they believe that it's just a sprain and it's going to resolve over a short amount of time.
Right. And that's kind of the whole issue is if it really is a sprain, then there's no need for treatment, which means two things. A, the doctor shouldn't be billing for it and shouldn't be treating them. But also B, you're probably not going to take that case because it means there really isn't an injury.
Right.
So if there is an injury and it's being diagnosed as a sprain, then we know that there's already a problem starting from the beginning with the diagnosis. So it's definitely like the kiss of death almost from the beginning to start with that. All right. So now some other things that you might deal with doctors that kind of make you upset, or is like, why are they doing this? What would you say about some of the ones who maybe are newer to PI, or they just don't know any better, or maybe they're looking for a quick payday with overbilling?
I think you're going to get jammed up. So what I'm seeing more and more is that major insurance companies with infinity dollars, like a State Farm or an Allstate, they're hiring billing experts in many, many cases to scour through the bills and find anything that they can find and exclude them. The insurance companies sort of do it de facto. The adjusters do it on their own. Like, you got an ice pack, you charge $5 for it. They're not going to pay you for that. They're not paying for things that we take for granted. Like, the ice packs aren't free. You're going to use them from time to time, but the insurance company is not going to pay for them. But when we get into inflated bills, and I don't like that term because I don't think that there's really truly inflated bills. I think they're all really tied to cost of living in the area that we're in and what insurance rates are. And it's a very complicated sort of metric, what you're going to bill for a particular treatment or a particular modality. That's very complicated. And I believe that the doctors and their offices know best, but the insurance companies don't want to pay anything. Their goal is to pay zero. Their goal is not to pay $1, it's to pay zero. So if they can hire a billing expert and pay that expert $5,000, but it saves them $10,000, they win every time. And so that's what I'm seeing more and more with any bills. So you want to be really, really specific about your billing. ICD codes are really important because they give me a lot of leg to stand on. I can point directly to what this bill and this diagnosis is tied to this bill. And so it's justified automatically, right? And that makes a huge difference when you're looking at just billing statements alone.
So, and that kind of brings me to my next point is when we talk about tying things together, that's why like at the end, a narrative report can be so helpful if it's done properly. If you get a narrative report that's just like, Jane Doe came in from an accident, we treated her, and now she's dismissed, that's not going to work very well. But if you get a narrative report where it says, hey, Jane Doe was seen after this accident, walks through everything that happened, conditions at the time, the type of impact, the type of car that was there, how far the car was pushed, goes through the physics of that, then talks about the injuries, how they're tied to the mechanism of injury from there. Then the treatment plan is then tied to the outcome measures you would expect based on the injury. And then from there, when you got to MMI, you explained why you got to MMI and if there's going to be permanency and what that means for the rest of their life and future care. That's pretty helpful to you.
That's the gold standard. What you just described is the gold standard. The biggest miss that I see in charts is not tying the crash to the injury. There's the biggest disconnect we call it causation in my world, the biggest disconnect in causation. Obviously, this person didn't have any pain whatsoever. They may have, I see a lot of degenerative condition or some pre-existing condition, a listhesis or something like that. They have this pre-existing condition, call it whatever you will, but it doesn't have any pain. So it's an asymptomatic pre-existing condition. And instead of doing the very basic thing of saying, patient was in a high-speed rear-end crash, 40 miles an hour, sustained, serious neck injury with whiplash, now has pain 8 out of 10 because of the crash. They don't put because of the crash. And they also don't take the step beyond that, which is to say, prior to the crash, patient experienced no pain, right? And those two sentences can be really the difference between you getting your bill paid or not. And it doesn't take much from the start. I think that a narrative on the back end when you're done, very, very important too. But from the start, documenting how the crash happened, what the speed was, what the physics are, all of those things, and that this is the competent cause of the injury is the most important thing you need to do right off the bat. And then from there, I think it's important for every doctor or any treater to understand that you're not just seeking lost wages and bills in a personal injury case. You're also seeking pain and suffering, loss of normal life compensation. And those are what we call non-economic damages. So the pain and suffering and loss of normal life is more amorphous, but the better it's documented, the better your patient is going to recover from the at-fault insurance, which again, not to be the cynic, increases the likelihood that your bill is going to get paid. And at the end of the day, you're a doctor. You want to help people, and you can't help people if you can't pay your bills. It's that simple. So you want to do everything in your power to make sure that they're paid, and documenting detailed pain and suffering, detailed changes in ADLs, things like that. Those are going to be really important when it comes time for me to negotiate with the insurance company and say to them, well, they can't turn their head to the left, so they can't drive. If they can't drive, they're stuck in their house. They can't get groceries. They can't do any of the things they need to do to live a normal life. And so that's worth money. You should pay me for it.
Right.
You should pay them for it rather. But without the proper documentation, I can't say any of those things.
Well, and let me kind of go back to a point you made there too, because I think that this is another area where not only doctors, but patients themselves don't really understand the difference is when it comes to that pre-existing. So they think, hey, you know what? I had back pain already. Now, yeah, it's worse from the accident, but I'm not going to worry with this. I'm not going to get an attorney. Or the doctor doesn't know that just because they had an issue with their lumbar spine prior and now they're in worse pain. So it's all about describing the difference. So it's okay if someone has a pre-existing of, let's say, a grade 1 spondylo at L3. After the accident, if it's a grade 2 and now they have radiating pain and loss of feeling from their knee down on the left side, just compare and contrast. Show the difference because that's clearly different. But just saying because there was a small issue there before, it's really, if they were an 8 out of 10 before and then they got an accident, now they're a 10 out of 10, that's still a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all about just talking about that difference.
And that's the law in Illinois, at least. The law is really clear. Insurance companies love to use pre-existing conditions as a defense because the average person looks at it and says, pre-existing, well, it existed before the crash. It's not their fault. But the law is really clear, and the law says you cannot limit the recovery of a plaintiff, an injured person, because their injury was caused by a pre-existing condition or it was the aggravation of a pre-existing condition made worse. So because the law is the law, anytime I have a jury trial, I get in front of the jurors and I wave that jury instruction around and I say to them, this is the law. And I understand you guys might think that it happened before the crash. It did. It was pre-existing, but it's worse. And here in the chart are the 35 times I can point to that it's documented that it's worse. And without that documentation, this theatrics, the courtroom TV fun stuff doesn't happen and your patient loses. And it's just simple stuff to document. It really is.
Right. And I think a lot of it has to do with too, is just sometimes they just don't put enough effort in. I mean, that's the one thing is when it comes to a personal injury case for a doctor, it is more work. I'm not going to lie. It is more work. It's more documentation, but it's also going to be much more rewarding for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're helping someone who's in a more pain from something that they didn't cause themselves. They had no issue over, and you're helping them get better. So that's great. 2, you're also getting to work with multiple different experts in the area with an attorney and co-managing with other doctors. So you're building that bond. So all around, it's going to be way more worthwhile, but you have to take that extra work. You can't half-ass it, unfortunately.
Right. Absolutely. And there's a little more inherent risk involved with, handling a personal injury patient, but the risk reward is greater as well for several reasons, most of which what you described.
And part of that too, we'll talk about two things here. Part of that too is, yes, there's going to be that risk reward, but that's all the more reason why you should work with people who know what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Because if you work with people who know what they're doing and you have that relationship, the risk goes down significantly. Where if you work with an attorney to where all the time they want to do is just settle, you're going to end up, from the patient perspective or the doctor perspective, you're not going to end up getting anywhere near what you wanted or expected. So next point, kind of talking about what you brought up with kind of proving and being able to point to different things. So it's probably more helpful when the doctor is talking about why they did specific treatments if it's based on actual science and fact, instead of just saying, well, in my 5 years of experience, this is what I've seen and this is why I decided to do this.
I agree. Anytime that you can back it up, right? We're in an evidence-based, proof-based business, the law. And so anytime I can back it up, there's a study that shows that I do this and this outcome happens. And so I do this with this patient and that outcome happens, and it's backed by these research studies, or this particular modality is backed by, whatever it might be. All those things are helpful. If you can, I have a high school teacher ringing in my head that says, cite your sources, right? Cite your sources, cite your sources. It's the same, I think, in your profession as it is in mine, that if you can cite your sources, you have a stronger position. Now, that's not to say that a doctor's experience is not relevant. I think a doctor's experience is tremendously relevant. You know things that I can only begin to understand. And I study the medicine because I have to, because it helps me help my clients, but I don't know it the way you know it. And I can't practice it the way you can practice it. I can't practice it legally anyway, but I can't practice it the way you can practice it at all. And so I'm reliant on you to use your expertise and your experience. And also when it comes time to prove things, especially in court, I'm reliant on your expertise and your experience to give your opinions about how the injury was caused, what the disability looks like, what the future prognosis might be. Those sorts of things are sometimes based in evidence and sometimes based in, hard fact, but sometimes it's also a doctor's diagnosis and opinion. And that's equally valid in many cases. But I agree, cite your sources. That's huge.
And kind of all around, when we put all this together, it all comes really down to communication as to what's going on, because it would probably be very important for you to know that the patient hasn't been showing up for the treatment for 3 weeks. You would probably like to know that.
Yeah.
And then, the doctor would also probably like to know if you decided to drop the case.
Right.
That would be probably pretty important too. So it's all about communication, because also if something comes along to where either A, we're not getting improvement and we need to refer them to a specialist or some other testing, it's very important for you, because the whole time you're working with the insurance company to try to get either a dollar amount covered, but you need to know where you're going. You need to know if this is something that's going to be a long-term effect of the client, or if it's something that they're going to 100% resolve from, which we know after any injury, you're never 100%, but still you need to know where it's going, because that way you know how to be negotiating, because you're working for the client. I mean, you are their advocate. So you need to know how to advocate for them based on what the doctor's doing and what the treatment is and what the prognosis is, but also just updates. Updates are helpful.
Updates are huge. And it also is helpful for me because we run into situations where, unfortunately, there are caps on the insurance limits. There's policy limits. So when you go buy your auto insurance, you may have a certain amount of liability limit. The usual is about $100,000, but the state minimum is only $25,000. And that's really common. And so I have cases where clients have catastrophic injuries that, I have wrongful death cases where there's only $25,000 in insurance. And that's not nearly enough to compensate a catastrophically injured paraplegic or a family who's lost a loved one, but we're trapped because that's the limit of the insurance, and there's no more money beyond that. We could go to court and we could get a front page headline $100 million verdict, and at the end of the day, the judge is just going to reduce it down to whatever the limit of the insurance is, or that's all we're ever going to be paid. So communication is really important because it helps me, it helps you, but it also helps your patient/client, because they're not going to be in a situation where they're holding the bag for a bunch of bills because there's not enough insurance coverage and things like that. And to touch on something you said earlier, I think communication is really important because oftentimes with a lawyer like me, I am not just a settlement firm. We don't just take cases and settle them real quick and turn them over and churn and burn. We're a firm that wants to maximize the compensation for the client. And a lot of times that means putting cases into court in a lawsuit and actually litigating the cases and taking them to trial. But for the courts being closed in 2020, I was supposed to have 7 jury trials. I unfortunately didn't get to have any of them, but that's normal for my type of practice. There are a lot of lawyers that will look to settle your case quickly and get your doctors paid quickly. And sometimes that's what should be done because sometimes it's clear cut. But other times you need a lawyer who can work with your doctors, can have those open lines of communication so everyone understands, hey, look, this is a tough one, either because you're not getting better or the patient's not getting better or whatever it is, that we're getting close to a point where we have to file a lawsuit in order to get proper and fair and just compensation. And so without that communication, you're going to have a doctor or a patient sitting there with no idea what's going on. They're frustrated. They're angry. They don't know why they're still getting treatment, and they may just stop and they end up hurting their case or hurting themselves because they're not finishing their treatment. They're not following what their doctor says, and they're not part of the communication process. I think everybody needs to be brought into that process. The patient, the doctor, myself, and anybody else that's relevant, right? If there's other doctors beyond you, you're the quarterback here, right? And you may pass the ball to somebody else, but you're still the quarterback. And so your communication with that other doctor is important, but it's also important that I know. And so I can communicate with that other doctor and we can all be on the same page so we can get the best interest of the client/patient put first.
Yeah, no, and that makes 100%. And that's kind of the basis of everything that I like to do. And when I work with other doctors, what we kind of train, because the one thing too that happens is when you start involving multiple doctors, even when you start talking about the worst thing we don't want is we don't want to have multiple different diagnoses pointing to different areas that just is going to, confuse people. But what I found is a lot of times, it's not that we have a different diagnosis. It's one of two things happen. Either A, by the time they get referred, their initial complaint has started to feel better and they start talking more about their secondary, tertiary complaint. So that's what they focus on when they go to the other doctor, which is totally fine. Now we just need to make sure I do another examination or that doctor, whatever it might be, to get on the same page as to how the treatment's going to go. Or what happens a lot of times too is where the issue is, let's say if we have an issue in the cervical spine, my diagnosis says that, his diagnosis says it too, but we use a different wording or we put the words in different order. It's the same thing, but we just want to clean that up so it's not confusing, because we always need to look at this as if it's going to go to trial.
Yeah,
that's the best way.
I tell every doctor I ever speak with, if they ask about personal injury cases, you need to write every chart note as if it will be put up on a giant whiteboard and read to a jury out loud. And if it doesn't make sense to a regular person, then it doesn't make sense, right?
Yep.
And everything that you do, if you write an email, write it like it's going to be read in court. And I think that's just a good life lesson too. But, especially when it comes to your business, every chart note, every conversation you have on the phone that you make a note about, whatever it is, write them in a way that it's going to prove what you've diagnosed, because your diagnosis is correct. You're doing the job correctly. But if you're not documenting it in a way that explains it to lay people, then the first two things don't matter as much because you're not going to be able to explain it.
Right. No, 100%. Well, we covered a lot of stuff. Is there anything that we didn't talk about you feel that you want to communicate at this point?
Just a couple things. I think speaking directly to a patient, I think whether you would hire me or hire anybody, it's vitally important that you speak with any personal injury lawyer, no matter how minor of a crash that you're in. And I think car crash is the perfect example. No matter how minor it is. They've done studies that show that you can suffer severe injuries in impacts as low as 4 miles an hour. And I'm talking, traumatic brain injuries in crashes that are 4 miles an hour. So it's vitally important that you talk to a personal injury lawyer to protect your rights right away. And the reason I say that is because insurance companies love to settle with you quickly before you have an opportunity to talk to a lawyer for far less than your case is worth. Now, when I'm talking to doctors, I think it's really, really important that if you have a patient who was in a car crash, work with a lawyer who's going to do three things for you. One, who's going to work on a lien. And if you don't know what that is, give me a call. I'm happy to walk you through it and explain it to you and tell you how the process works. But you want a lawyer who's going to work on a lien. You want a lawyer who has a history of trying cases or taking cases to court. And you want to make sure that the lawyer that you're sending cases to or working with is not someone who's just trying to take what we call quick money. I used to be a defense lawyer for insurance companies, and we would know right away, this guy will take quick money. He'll take $2,000 less than this case is worth. And we know it because they're in a position where they're either over leveraged or, they're in a position where they're trying to scale quickly. So they need cash, whatever it is. And the way you find that out is by building friendships and relationships and getting to know that person. And I think, that's another really important part of working with somebody is getting to know them, getting to trust them the same way you trust any referral source. You trust the doctor that you refer for pain management. You trust the orthopedist you might refer to if you suspect a fracture. So you want to be able to trust and know the lawyer that you work with before you start trusting them with your patients. I think that's really, really important. It can be a murky area of insurance and law and everything else. It's not as straightforward as everyone thinks that it is. And so I think finding an expert that you know, like, and trust is really the most important thing.
Sounds good. I would completely agree. And one thing too, I hope that really came across with all this is that just you can tell when an attorney has knowledge of doing personal injury and goes a little bit above and beyond. And then there's some who don't. And I can tell you, just working with lots of different attorneys, like John knows what he's doing. I can tell you that 100%. So let's say someone wants to get in contact with you. What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Easiest way to get in contact with me is to find our firm on the internet. I'm one of the attorneys at the Collins Law Firm in Naperville. It's collinslaw.com, COLLINS law.com, or you can call me directly. My number is 773-809-5749, or you can shoot me an email. My email is jrisvold, it's RISVOLD @collinslaw.com. And I'm available 24/7, 365. If you're hurt and you need someone on your side, make sure that I'm one of your first calls.
Sounds good. So I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope you got a lot of information because this was a lot of good information. And it just goes to show you that, hey, if you're a patient and you're in an injury, you need to talk with an attorney and make sure that you're getting the treatment you need. And if you're a doctor trying to do personal injury, you need to make sure you know what you're doing because it's not going to end up working out for the client, the patient, or the attorney, or you yourself. So it's all about having that knowledge and the experience and also the training on how to do everything. So I'm Dr. DeCubellis again. I hope everyone have, enjoyed everything. Any questions, reach out to John. He gave you his contact information and I'll make sure we can get that posted too. And right now I'm at Main Street Chiropractic. I'm in Downers Grove too. If you have any questions, I can definitely help you too. 630-435-6461. But it's all about making sure you first get that protection, and attorney is the way to do it with personal injury. All right. Thank you very much. And we will talk soon.
Fantastic. Thank you. Have a good one. Happy New Year.